it is really, really difficult not to root for Rick Barnes. When you talk about what a fine man he is, what a incredible person he is, and the effect that he's had on thousands of lives, it's really hard not to root for Rick Barnes, especially now that his career is in the twilight, Caleb. And I believe if he doesn't get another Final Four on his resume, he's going to be viewed, and I'll share some numbers. He's going to be viewed as just another coach. Click the like and subscribe button. Caleb, it's hard not to root for Rick Barnes.
It really is. It really is. Rick Barnes is he's honestly one of the best people he's never compromised his principles when it comes to coaching in college, even if it wouldn't get him a national championship, because what he wants to do more than anything is prepare players for life, whether that be behind the desk or whether that be going to the NBA. He wants to try to get what's best out of them. Now, hasn't always coached the best character guys, but you know what? Not everybody turns out to be a character guy. You can't make them all great. Tristan Thompson is a serial cheater, but he made it to the NBA. So
serial cheater.
Oh yeah, he was Khloe Kardashian's baby daddy.
So. I mean, but I'm not judging people on that. He's not out shooting people like in Tuscaloosa. I'm not going to judge people on cheating. I don't know what's going on with his relationship.
Well, he just
I mean, I think you're. I mean, nobody's perfect. I mean,
no, but Tristan Thompson is a little bit wild. It's not like one time. I said serial.
I mean, but I don't know.
But anyways, that's celebrity news that Tristan Thompson's gotten involved with. That's a different story altogether. And given the fact that it's Kardashians, maybe they orchestrated him cheating so they could have a narrative for their show. So maybe I should draw back on that too. But anyways, for the most part, Rick Barnes players turn out to be great people. They maximize their NBA potential, and that's what he cares about. Here's why Rick Barnes needs a Final Four run, and I'm with you in another one. There are some coaches who didn't make deep runs in the NCAA tournament and never won a title, but they're famous because of their coaching tree. Like, Gene Cady. I'm sure you know Gene Cady, the old Purdue coach.
Gene Cady. He had some incredible hair dye back in the day.
Well, Gene Cady never, and I mean never, I'm not kidding, I don't think ever made the Final Four. I think he only made one Elite Eight. But Gene Cady's not famous for what he did as a head coach. He's famous for the numerous successful coaches that coached under him that he spawned, most notably Matt Painter at Purdue right now. Another one, and this is a big one I want to name, is Tom Davis. You know Tom Davis, Dave. That's Bruce Pearl's mentor, Dr. Tom Davis.
Right.
Tom Davis was at Lafayette, Boston College, Stanford, and Drake and Iowa. And at none of those schools did he ever make it past the Elite Eight. Doesn't matter. Okay, Tom Davis spawned Bruce Pearl. He spawned Gary Williams, who won a national championship in Maryland. And indirectly, he actually spawned Rick Barnes, who coached under Gary Williams in the 80s. So the thing about Rick Barnes, one of the reasons I think he needs a Final Four is, I mean, this is going to be tough to say, but Rick Barnes' coaching tree ain't that good. Most of his assistants don't really work out that well. And so he doesn't have that legacy to hang his hat on. I mean, the vintage Rick Barnes protege Dave is Dennis Felton, the old Georgia coach.
Coaching tree or not. Ultimately, Rick Barnes is going to be judged off what he does. And if he doesn't make another Final Four run, then I think he's going to be judged as just a good coach and not a very good coach, and certainly not a great coach. But let's take a look at some numbers here. First numbers, Barnes 70 years old. So he may retire after this season. He may retire in 4 years. I don't know. I've gotten conflicting reports, so I'm pretty 50-50 on that. He made a Final Four run at Texas in 2003, but that doesn't make them special. There have been almost 100 coaches make just one Final Four. And I'm curious if you've heard of a guy that took Colorado to the Final Four in 1942. His name was Frosty Cox. You probably haven't heard of Frosty Cox.
That's the best name of all time.
Pretty good name. The two-timer club is more exclusive, and that's 69 coaches have 2 or more Final Four appearances. Out of that, 36 have just 2. So you enter a group that is roughly about 69 coaches. That's way different than 169 coaches that have made one Final Four run. To make 2, bank on it, brought to you by Commercial Bank, member FDIC, Life Made Better, would change the way that Rick Barnes is viewed forever. Get Caleb's take, 30 seconds, brought to you by Commercial Bank.
Commercial Bank is your neighborhood bank. What makes us different from other banks? We understand that every customer has unique opportunities, challenges, and financial concerns. We don't expect you to fit into the same box as the next person or business. Whether it's purchasing a home, saving for your child's future, or planning for your next vacation, we're with you every step of the way to navigate life's big decisions. Commercial Bank. Life.
All right, so bank on it. Rick Barnes would be considered a great coach if he makes another Final Four run. Caleb?
I think he would be considered a great coach at that point. I agree. Basically, we're saying, does Rick Barnes want to be in the same tier as Frosty Cox or in the tier in the league of 69? So I think he will be a great. I think he'll go down as a great coach, because then he will have those 2 on his resume at 2 different schools. By the way, here's the thing we're going to miss, Dave: the most successful coach ever at 2 different schools, also. And
That's a good point.
Yeah, and he will have turned out some NBA legendary talent. I mean, some legendary NBA talent. And I think that stands out. I mean, we're talking like he is a guy who maybe turned out one of the top 10 players of all time. I'm not sure if Kevin Durant's top 10. He may be top 15 in my book, but he's in that range, top 15 to 10. And
Rick Barnes, you also have to factor in this, and I think this is important to point out. I think there are 2 things that have nothing to do with record that are a little bit vague that you have to give Rick Barnes some credit or grace for. And the first is that Rick Barnes is a great guy. So we've discussed that he's done a lot for young men that play basketball for him. And he's done a lot for the communities that he's been a part of, which would be going back to Clemson, Austin, now Knoxville. But the other thing I give him an awful lot of, I guess, grace for more than credit is he's done so at 2 powerhouse schools, or 2 football powerhouse schools. Texas, I can guarantee you, during a lot of Rick Barnes's time there, did not consider basketball to be a huge priority. If there's $1 laying there and it hasn't been already earmarked to one particular line item on the budget, it's going to go to football. If you have $1 laying there, it's going to go to football. Rick Barnes, I know, had major issues with Philip Fulmer being the athletic director, and that's why he almost bolted to UCLA. So then you have some meddling. Before that, going back before Mike Hamilton obviously made a very astute hire with basketball. But before that, you had Doug Dickey, who would stand up for a 3rd-string defensive tackle to be academically eligible, but didn't get Isaiah Victor academically eligible. So Kevin O'Neill said, "Peace out, I'm gone." And you look at some of the buffoonery hires on the basketball side when Tennessee had all the money they needed to build a basketball program. So let's give Rick Barnes grace for that. He has not put up the numbers he's put up at a Duke or North Carolina, where you pick up the phone, you call a booster, and you say, "I need a flight to go see this kid," and it's done. Football, it's done. Basketball, now it's done. In the 90s, I don't think it was done, Caleb. I don't think you picked up the phone and said, "I've got to go see this small forward in Topeka, Kansas, and there's a plane warm and waiting for you." If you say, "I need a defensive tackle from LA," I promise you there's a warm plane waiting for you.
yes, and it's funny what you said about that with Fulmer. I did not know that he had issues with that, because Fulmer was the one who gave him his big payday. Was he worried about Fulmer basically just caring too much about basketball? And I'm sorry, I didn't know that, what you're telling me. So he had issues with Fulmer as athletic director?
Yes. He had big time issues. I spoke to somebody about that this week, actually. And Um, it Philip ran the athletic department like Doug Dickey ran the athletic department, and I don't think that I don't think the basketball program got full support. Listen, he wanted to go to UCLA for two reasons. One, it's UCLA, but don't underestimate. That's why he stayed. Is there were some concessions made, and there wouldn't be meddling with his program, and he would get better support. It wasn't anything huge. It wasn't a hatred or any sort of thing. It was just he's a football guy. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah, I agree. And then Fulmer did give him that big contract to keep him. So I wonder if that was the booster saying you got to pay this guy. I understand what you're saying. Look, Philip Fulmer, when he hired Kelly Harper, what did he do? I mean, we had John Adams on the show. He had who he wanted, and then apparently he says in the press conference, "Well, I'll talk to the gals," and they told me. I mean, I thought, really? So Fulmer is definitely not the most in touch with the other sports. We do know that. He made some necessary moves sometimes. He did make the gutsy call to fire Holly Warlick. But now what you're telling me is, Dave, do you think Fulmer just made his decisions with football and with the other sports? Whenever he made decisions, he was just letting other people tell him what to do, pretty much?
Probably something to that. I mean, did he have Kelly Harper's phone number? I don't know. Probably not. Probably got some input from somebody else. Derek says, I missed the 90s and how the Tennessee program was running. I'll take football success over all those other sports.
Well, anybody would.
Agreed. But let's remember, let me ask you this, changing it up a little bit. Does Rick Barnes get some negative pushback because he's not running the exciting offense? And I don't think he has the overall physical ability on his team that those Tony Harris and Vincent Yarbrough teams have. But we've never discussed it, Caleb. Where do you stand on that? I think that crew was more talented. Would you agree? Disagree?
That crew was more talented. And okay, and I want to point this out. A lot of people like to look back on that crew and say, well, Vincent Yarbrough was an NBA flameout market. Like, nobody from that crew had an NBA career or a long-term NBA career. I push back on that because I argue the reason none of them had a long-term NBA career is because none of them really were developed right for the NBA.
I completely agree. I mean, remember Marcus Hayslip? We haven't even mentioned his name.
Freak athlete.
He benched 400 pounds.
And he had a 48-inch vertical, I think.
Yeah, I remember I went to the trainer and I said, you have to swear to the Lord above that he benched 400 pounds because I completely didn't believe it. Dylan, you're absolutely right. Barnes 100% gets flack for how he plays the game. Basically, let me say this, and if you think I'm crazy, tell me. I think that Tennessee fans who are basically football fans, right? That's the fan base. I think Tennessee fans would rather see an exciting team go to the Sweet 16 than a defensive-minded team that plays in the 40s go to the Elite Eight. Agree or disagree with that? I know it's crazy, but those
not anymore.
Are so exciting.
Not anymore. You might have had a point in the Bruce Pearl years when he took over, but I don't think anymore. I think now they want to see a deeper run. And so that's where I do think it's a little bit different. I think nowadays they just want to see a deeper run in general. But yeah, I mean, look, Marcus Hayslip and Vincent Yarbrough are the two most talented players, I think, to ever play at Tennessee. Ron Slay was one of the most skilled. Buzz Peterson had all three of those guys his first year at Tennessee and went 13-16.
I mean, Marcus Hayslip barely played. I mean, considering his ability, I mean, he barely got on the court.
And well, that's. I mean, I respect Charles Hathaway and Isaiah Victor. They were stealing minutes from Marcus Hayslip in 2000. I'd have thrown Marcus Hayslip out there. Dude was too athletic. And I mean, we're talking about Tony Harris. Tony Harris too was an NBA prospect if he got developed properly. So it's just none of these guys were coached well. None of these guys were developed well. And also, I can't say this for Hayslip, but for Vincent Yarbrough, some of them just didn't have the mental makeup to be an NBA player or a champion in college.
Okay, but let me retort with this. They would have had the right mental makeup because it would have been developed had they been under Rick Barnes.
Oh, you're right. Rick Barnes on that team. Rick Barnes maybe is a two-time national champion. The question becomes, though, and here's the hard part, Dave. It's twofold. Do those players stay on that team if Rick Barnes is on the team? Or do some of them say, I don't like this, I'm not going to go play for him?
Probably. Dylan throwing high heat. I like this comment a lot. It also doesn't help that the big man on campus that's football is sold as fast tempo scoring offense. Then right after football season, we get defensive basketball. Very true. I mean, you're so excited about what's supposed to be this high flying offense, and it wasn't at times last year. And then you transition into basketball. I think we know this much, right? There is not going to be any sort of philosophical change in what Rick Barnes does. So he's either going to get that second that second Final Four that is going to change his legacy with defensive basketball, or he's not going to get it at all. I think we can agree there.
Yeah,
Yes,
I agree.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Unsung, you're right. Hayslip had a really funky shot. The one thing I don't knock Hayslip about, sorry to throw you off, but he didn't, to be a great athlete, he didn't seem to have the best hand-eye coordination.
No. Marcus Hayslip was a
He was Blake Griffin.
He was a very classic SEC player, by the way, in the 2000s. We'll just say that. I don't know if you guys remember, before the SEC hired good coaches, like, you know how the SEC is known for speed in college football, speed and athleticism? They were known for speed and athleticism in college basketball, just no control whatsoever. Go watch those Mark Gottfried Alabama teams play back in the mid-2000s, okay? They played up-tempo and absolutely no control. It was almost like they were trying to play wide receiver in football.